Okay guys, this is part 3, Indigo Lost, book 1 of the Infinity Squared series. It's a little bit bumpy at the moment, so if bits of me go flying, I can only apologise. Not that it's bad driving, it's just a bumpy road, okay? So, back to Daryl. Daryl pondered the work waiting for him, his eyes closed, and absently totting up figures for a business investment he was eyeing up, even as he felt a hand trail up his leg, followed by another. But he refused to react, curious as to what might follow. A body joined him, and he knew she had a knee either side of his legs, felt the wetness of damp hair against his thighs, and fingers on his swimming trunks. Her body shielded him from anyone else, and he let himself enjoy the touch of her fingers as they loosened the tie of his shorts, easing them down, and then playing with him until his body responded, filling and swelling in her hands, sensing admiration in her touch. Suddenly her mouth took him, almost all of him, and it was enough to make him open his eyes as a wave of pleasure soared through him. Her head bent to take every inch of his ample erection as far down her throat as she could, lips closing around him and sucking, tongue caressing, and he put one hand in her hair and grasped a handful of wet, dark tresses, liking this birthday present very much. He was impressed, it was good, and he'd plenty of experience to judge. He watched with amusement as her head bobbed up and down over his crotch, letting the pleasure build, knowing well enough his release was near. His hand tightened on her hair, perhaps a little too tightly, and he held her head down, forced her to keep him in her mouth as he climaxed, the force making him thrust into her as the ripples shook him. Swallow. He felt her obey him as he was still deep inside her throat, and then released her head, letting her come up for air, her eyes going nowhere near meeting his. She licked her lips uncertainly, unsure, the cat-like confidence gone in the aftermath of her pleasurable offering. "I can trust you can put back what you took out to play with," he asked arrogantly, and then watched her tidy him away and retie his trunks in silence, satisfied she was beginning to understand that he was to be obeyed at all times by everyone. Daryl took hold of her arm and pulled her to lie next to him, surprising her, because his authoritarian attitude had been unfriendly to the point where she had thought he would send her away, having served her purpose. The girl didn't argue though. She was smart enough to know that this man was worth pleasing. Every girl was aware that he was the prize. Every girl wanted to be the one he married. It was true he was arrogant, but did he not have reason to be? Even being his girlfriend for a few weeks would be an achievement, something every woman secretly competed to be. She settled herself obediently where he seemed to want her, aware she was the first girl to have been invited to his lone seating arrangement that evening, wondering how she had managed to catch his interest. She could still taste him on her tongue. A hand lazed up from her hip to her ribs, then her bikini top, warm against her skin, the fingers pushing under the fabric and playing with her nipple. The languid touch made her want him, made her curve her body against his, for although he paid her little sincere attention, it was impossible not to be seduced when his hard, toned body was pressed against hers, and her mind was buzzing with the knowledge of his reputation. It made her wet just to think of the things that she had heard about him, combined with the quiet power exuding from him, and her heart started pulsing faster with the wild hope he would take her into the veiled interior of the gazebo and take her bikini off completely for a more thorough inspection. How her friends would envy her. Even her mother would be proud of her. All the years of seeing him from a distance, and here she was, lying beside him, having so intimately pleasured him less than 2 minutes ago. The evening took on a dreamlike quality. Daryl, however, was not after an evening so singularly tame, although it would be intimate. The platinum blonde he had seen in the bejeweled turquoise bikini earlier caught his attention, and he recalled the inviting look in her eyes. He had also noticed the obviously enhanced breasts that strained against the wisps of material that barely covered them, and decided to appreciate her investment, or more likely her parents' investment. It was a tendency of the rich to do everything they could to beautify their children, no expense spared, especially if they thought that child might snare him into marriage. Indeed, every parent with a daughter at Harvard hoped for one particular set of nuptials. The second girl responded to his look much like the first. moving away from the group of people she was with, and he admired her again as her long legs carried her towards him, his appreciation of her figure ruined by the cynicism he did not try to control. He was arrogant enough to know he had the choice of all women, and could take his pick from those without surgical improvements, but still, he was reminded as he observed her of the one thing that still eluded the wealthy of the world he still lived in: genuine beauty. So few had it with the truest sense, so many paid to try and achieve it, even in this world where those who could choose the genes for their children to get designer, perfect babies. He, however, was blessed with a natural masculine beauty that he could thank both of his parents for, yet knew he was desirable not only for his face and body, but also for his bank balance. Hence the reason he was a model. Hence the reason he had been nominated the world's most handsome man, one of those media inventions that he didn't really care about, yet still allowed to pander to his youthful male pride. His 18-year-old psyche, however, did not spare a second to think of his invisible kind of beauty, the kind that existed inside the physical shell he judged so arrogantly. On impulse he chose another, a redhead, slightly more curvaceous, and wearing a daring yellow bikini, all pale skin and freckles. She was also minus any silicone enhancements, as he preferred. The two reached him at the same time, and he stood, dislodging and encouraging the brunette to her feet, stroking the backs of the two new women, guiding them towards the doorway of his gazebo, picking up his cocktail as he went, knowing one of the waiting servants would let the silken curtain fall closed. Inside, under the glow of more gentle lights that showed off the exquisite shimmer of the cushions and rugs that covered the floor, he sat down on the wide chair and watched them for a moment, taking his shades off and tossing them on the low table to the side. Daryl knew they were waiting for him to tell them what to do. God forbid they should take the initiative. Teeth ground and a muscle jumped in his jaw as he fought to control the burst of rage, not sure if he was more frustrated that they stood there waiting for instruction, or angry they were so overawed by him. Normally he enjoyed intimidating people into submission, into fulfilling his wishes, but sometimes it would be nice not to have to orchestrate everything. Why don't you put on a little show of your own while I have my drink? Then we'll see what happens. It was not a suggestion, although it sounded like it. At least he had chosen well, and the woman did not seem to find the command at all shocking. No one would accept an invitation to one of his parties if they weren't prepared to fuck, or to be fucked. There had only ever been one uncomfortable moment of such kind, a while back, and since then he was always very careful to make sure it wasn't repeated. He had no time for it, not so much as a second. There was no room in his life for weakness, innocence, or sentimentality. They were alien concepts to him, and he was happy with that state of affairs. Emotions were complicated. He engaged with as few as possible. It kept life simple. The platinum blonde took the lead and turned on the redhead, the clash of hair colours interesting. He knew they were both fake. However, although they looked good, the colours were too bright, too perfect to be natural. Perhaps the brunette was natural though, he mused, but had had some highlights put in. Daryl sipped his drink in silent contemplation as he watched them kneel on the soft rug on the floor. There was a good collection of pillows piled around them, and the redhead lay back, sharing a relatively believable kiss with the blonde, the brunette getting on her knees and trailing kisses up the blonde's back. The tangle of limbs and seeking lips ended with the redhead lapping at the brunette's cleft, hands clutched around her bottom, and the brunette using her mouth on the blonde, and the blonde satisfying the redhead with her own teasing fingers, the bottom raised up in front of the brunette. The writhing collection of limbs and whimpers was having an effect, and Daryl felt himself responding, took one final swig and set the beautiful glass down, even as he saw the brunette's lips part with the cry of ecstasy, the tilt of hips and arch of spine so familiar. Stepping forward, he covered those lips with his own and felt her respond, kissing him back as he finished the work of the fingers on the redhead, watching both the blonde and the redhead climax with the ache of not being fully joined with flesh, a state of affairs he would rectify shortly. The touch of his hand and bodies moved. This time he was stripped of one item of clothing. The females joined in again, only this time they were centered on him, and he closed his eyes to enjoy the power of the blonde riding him. His hands and lips busied themselves above and below his waist, the blonde leaning down to kiss his neck when he pulled her head towards him, feeling her hair brush against his chest. Midnight and a whole night ahead of him, and at least another 50 beautiful women to choose from. Dear God, it's good to be me. The front door slammed and the child crept out.